Hello there. This evening, I have been editing a podcast for my most recent interview at the Authors Podcast. And I got to thinking as I was going through all these steps this afternoon that maybe it might be interesting for people to know the behind the scenes of creating a podcast. So, this very low tech document of this Word doc that has this title and my name won't be up for long because I'm actually going to show you some cool stuff. But this is where we're going to start. So I kind of want to give you a little bit of like the timing that it takes me from start to finish to get an episode posted for the Authors Podcast and some of the tools that I use. Because maybe someone is interested in starting a podcast. Maybe someone's just interested in what that looks like. So this is like a last minute thing that I decided to do, which isn't my typical MO, but we're going to go for it. So the first thing that we go back and forth on is booking a guest. So I do this podcast with author Dana Hawkins, whose upcoming debut, Not in the Plan, comes out in January. And she and I have been critique partners for many years, and we co-host this podcast together. The episode I did today was a solo episode. But so I was my guest today is a Wild Ink author, Riley Kilmore, who wrote her upcoming middle grade debut, Shay the Brave, that comes out also in January. So got a couple of January shout out debut authors coming up. And so I decided to have Riley on. And typically for when I host authors, I try to read their full. It's not always possible. Riley's was a middle grade, so it was on the shorter side. I did have time to read that. Still took me a few hours. And then I also, this is where I'm going to hop off of this slide onto another slide. Let's minimize you. After I either read the full or at least read the first three chapters. And if I read the first three chapters, I still do some research on the author. I'll create kind of a template of what I think we're going to talk about based on the author's background, their areas of expertise, what their book is about. And so here's kind of Riley's template, but we don't stick to this. And that's the beauty of a podcast because conversation comes up organically and then you go off topic and that's where the magic happens. So, but I do like to give my authors a little bit of a security blanket and a few questions that they can prepare for. Because I know when I'm on a podcast, I like to feel that I'm prepared. So after we do this, we also send the author a list of kind of podcast 101 bits of information. They need to have a microphone, headphones, kind of how to set up the environment so we get the best pre-recording sound possible. And so we go over a few things like that with them via email. So, that part can take another hour or two to kind of, break all that down. And then after the day of the interview, I use, oh, that's not the right spot. Here we go. I use a program called Squadcast, which I really like. I do pay a small fee to use it, but it is worth it. Squadcast makes it the easiest on the guest as possible. They literally click on a link, and it makes it the easiest on you in post-production in that you have a separate recorded track for each participant. And what that means is like, let's say one guest is speaking and the other guest is flipping through papers or taking a drink of water, and there's noise on their end. You can go on their track and mute that part of it. So it makes it really nice. The other nice thing, and this has happened to me before, is sometimes Wi-Fi does its thing. And so if Wi-Fi does its thing while you're recording and it isn't cooperating, then Squadcast will combine all of the tracks for the participants into one feed and upload it to the cloud. That does make it more difficult in post-production editing, but at least you haven't lost the feed that you've worked so hard to get with this particular guest. Now, this part of the process can take anywhere from about 30 minutes to 60 minutes, depending on how long you are talking with your guest. One of the things I encourage you to do at this part of the process is before you hop on, you say a few hellos, when you hit record 15 to 20 seconds of white noise or awkward silence, because each room is going to have its own kind of background noise. Maybe that's someone leaf blowing down the street, or the sound of an air conditioner, or the humming of an appliance. And even though we try to minimize that on the front end, it still sometimes happens. So we record that 15 to 20 minutes of silence so we could remove that background noise in post production, and I'll show you how to do that. All right, so we're done the episode. We've said goodbye. The next thing I do is I export these tracks as MP3s. You have the choice between MP3s or waves. I typically use MP3s. I think they're a little better with the program that I use in post production, which is Audacity. And that's where I'm going to take you next. So, Audacity is a free, downloadable audio editing platform. There is a little bit of a learning curve, but there are so many resources, especially on YouTube, to help you learn how to use it. So I've created an intro and an outro in Audacity and then exported it as MP3 that I import each time. I have music over my intro, and all of my music I typically get from Audio Jungle. It's a great place to support freelance musicians, and all of their music is pretty inexpensive. I'm talking like $5 to $10 for downloads that then are royalty free. So that's where my intro music comes from. And if you listen to my podcast, you'll hear it. And so I drop in my intro, and then you don't see here, but there was like a large chunk of just empty silence. And that was that recording of the room. And then what I do is you just go select it like this. You go up to Effect, Noise Removal, Noise Reduction, and it'll guide you through how to do that. And so you reduce the background noise on each track. And here I just have myself and Riley are the only two tracks that I had to do that noise removal on. And it really does get rid of a lot of it. Now, I get really detailed when it comes to editing. So I do the noise reduction first, and then back in effects, I do compression first, and I just use the factory settings, and then normalize factory settings. And that's all of the effects that I use, because I think if you use too many effects, it doesn't sound natural anymore. But then I do kind of zoom in, and as I'm listening to the feed, like, so here is where I was speaking, I would go into Riley's feed, select all of this, and this is the mute. Just in case there was the rustling of paper or whatever, that noise is gone. And then also, you can even dial in even further if a participant says, or there's a mouth click or whatever. If those sounds are separated enough, I will go in and delete those. But one thing you want to keep in mind is like let's say there was a mouth click or an here. I don't want to just delete that in one track, because then all of these are going to be off. So I hit shift, and then you can delete them in both tracks. Just want to make sure whatever you do to one track, you do to the other. It's kind of very important. So once I've edited the entire episode and added the intro, I've now back here added the outro, and I like to kind of bleed the outro or the intro music over to the actual podcast episode itself. I think that sounds real nice. Then I export it. And after I export it, I listen to it one more time. And at that time, oh wait, I'm just going to minimize this. I take notes. And I take the notes in my WordPress podcast blog platform, because I am listening for all of the things that we talked about that I can bullet point that I think listeners might be interested in. So I listen to it again. So this is the second time that I'm just taking these notes. Like, what are the things that a listener may be interested in? So I do that. Then I build the web page. So, the web page or the show notes, as you hear it called in podcast. Here I've uploaded the episode, and in the back end of my website, I've already set it up where this RSS feed goes to iTunes, Spotify, all the podcast platforms. A lot of times I include about the author, and I sometimes these are all set up differently depending on how the episode goes, but this was how Riley's worked out. I have a copy of her gorgeous book cover. If you're curious about how I made this 3D book cover, I'll show you that. I use this website. It's free, DIYbookcovers.com/3D mockups, and you can make multiple 3D mockups. And I think they look really nice in marketing materials to have that 3D look. Then I have what we discuss. I did pull a bunch of book covers of other books. I didn't do those in 3D because they're not the feature book. Riley's is. But I did want to have these images, and you can click on them and it goes right to Amazon to purchase, because these are 5 books that Riley and I talk about in this episode. I have Riley's contact info, and then I pulled a quote that I thought really just meant a lot to me during our conversation. Over here, I scheduled this for January 1st, 2024 to drop. Her book comes out on the 9th. I typically drop my episodes on a Monday. And then here I made sure to select the category that is my podcast, RSS feed. I have my featured image, and that part is done. So I've got a few days before this episode drops. So a couple of other things that I do to prep for the launch of that episode is over on I have a template that I've made, and this is all truth be told. This is my second time doing this because the first time I still had 2023 there. But I swap out authors' names or guest names and their headshot, download that, and then I import that, and well, let me go one step further into this program called Headliner that also can take a clip of that audio, and it's free to use if you own like maybe 3 or 4, which I never have that many episodes, so I've never had to pay for it. But it's a way to create a nice teaser with an image and with some audio, and I'll let you see a little bit what that looks like. So this is about the main character, Shay. It had only taken a moment for a passing thought to become a moral duty she could not shirk. I just love that. I love using Headliner because then I can export this with a little teaser and go over here and drop it on Instagram, drop it on Twitter, drop it on Facebook, and kind of build a little bit of momentum towards that episode releasing. So that is a little bit about how Dana and I do our podcast. And the last thing that I would mention is sometime between now and that scheduled launch of January 1st, I will take a walk with my earbuds in and listen to the episode like a listener. So I'm not editing, I'm not taking notes, and I have my earbuds in, because it's very different to be listening to a podcast with earbuds in than it is to be listening to it on your computer. So I'll take a walk, listen to it in its entirety, make sure that there's nothing that I've missed that's just really bothersome as a listener, and sometimes I've had to go back and re-edit again. So total for me, the process from start to finish for getting an author's podcast up can be about 8 to 10 hours. And I don't want that to discourage anyone from starting their own podcast, but those details matter to me. And I think that if I'm promoting an author or an editor or an agent or anyone on my podcast, I want them to have the best promotion possible. And I want to put a lot into making sure that they sound great. So if you are interested in starting a podcast, or if this video was helpful to you, please let me know. Again, last minute did this, which isn't my typical way I approach things, but today I was inspired to share the backstory of how I create the Authorish podcast. And not to say that Dana doesn't do her part, because she 1000% does. Dana typically is the girl in the back end doing all the research and creating the questions and all of that. So she's kind of the front end and I'm kind of the back end, and together I think we're a perfect pair. So anyway, I hope this was helpful to you. Please let us know and have a great rest of your day.